Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest Ohio X virtual event. We have a great topic today with great presenters, and we're really looking forward to digging in with you. As everyone gets settled, just want to do a quick overview, welcome, and introduction of today's virtual event, which is on new trends in cyber and data security. As we're almost in December and turning the page to 2024, this is a fantastic topic and one that is of great importance, I know, to every organization, every company, every technology company out there, and something that everyone is keeping in mind. And so we're doing this in partnership with experts from Marsh McLean Agency, Myers, Roman, Freeburg, and Lewis, and Pease Bell CPAs. My name is Chris Berry. I am the president and CEO of OhioX. We're a statewide technology nonprofit association working to build Ohio's tech hub. And with our members across the state, we connect, promote, and advocate for Ohio's tech growth. Part of that is a lot of education, learning, virtual events, so we can help hopefully everyone learn something a little bit new today, especially on such an important topic around cyber and data security. As we get going, here's a bit of our overview. We'll do some welcome, so you'll get to know who's part of today's conversation. We'll do introductions of each of our speakers in just a moment, and then we'll dig into our presentation and discussions, and then we're going to wrap up with a Q&A session. And so as you're listening throughout this session, you are welcome really in a couple different ways to send in questions. You can do it as the question comes to you in the course of the conversation. We'll try to work it in, but if we can't, we will save it for the Q&A. So if you have a question that pops up at any time, please put it in the chat. You can put it in for everyone to see, or if you'd like to just send it to me as our moderator, you are more than welcome to do that too, if that's something of more comfort to you. We have three experts with us today that are going to share and present. We have Jim Lash, who's the president of Ohio Property Casualty Division at Marsh McLean. We have David Croft, who's an original OhioX board member and partner and has helped us grow this organization. He is a Cleveland-based partner at Myers Roman Law Firm. And then we have Heath Bandy, who's a vice president of executive risk at Marsh McLean. And then we have a fourth presenter who unfortunately was not able to join us kind of last minute for today, but we will I'm going to restart this so everyone can see it. But Tim helped us put this all together. And so he is the director of risk advisory service at Pease Bell's CPAs. And again, Tim was not able to join, but he was originally hoping to and was really instrumental in putting this all together. And so I'm going to stop sharing right now, and I'm going to welcome up our other presenters. And really our MC for today from the expert side is Jim Lash. Jim and his firm at Marsh McLean have been incredible partners of OhioX. Really grateful to you, Jim, and Nick, and Heath, and so many more that have helped make our work possible and help us bring some great content today. And so as a final kind of remark from me to Jim, to Heath, to David, and then Carmen on our team for putting this all together, thank you. A lot of prep goes into these sessions, and so we're very excited to welcome everyone and hopefully showcase some great comments. As a final part, before I hand it over to you, Jim, thank you to Warner Moore in the comments who mentioned afternoon to everyone. I should have mentioned that a bit ago, but I think that's a final great comment that not just question, but if you have any thoughts or just kind of want to be part of the dialogue, or even do things like drop your LinkedIn in there so people connect with you. We have people from across the state joining this. We'd absolutely love to see that. So Warner, thanks for kicking us off strong in the comment session. Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you if you want to start the presentation. And again, I'll be here to help moderate, and I'll be back on towards the end during our Q&A session. So Jim, welcome. Thanks so much for being here. And again, thanks for helping us put together such an engaging presentation.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everyone. Really appreciate the opportunity here that Chris has provided us. It's such a great organization. We love being a member here. And this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart over the last 20 years. As you can see, maybe by the gray, I've been doing this quite a long time. And I know it's near and dear to the hearts of both David and Heath as well. So I'm going to pull and do a share screen real quick and get our presentation started up here. So our trends in cyber and data security is going to be our topic today. This is an amazing topic, and most of you folks it's near and dear to your hearts as well if you're in the technology space. And this goes back. I've been involved with it since the times of early on when DSW and LexisNexis had their first initial incidents several years ago, well before Target and some of the others that are more prevalent. And this industry has blossomed because of cyber and data security risks and data privacy. And so I've followed it. I've been heavily involved with it, and so is Heath. And so we're excited to share some trends and thoughts and ideas. And I know David is equally deep and has been involved with just as long. And so I'm going to go to the agenda real quick. And just as a refresher, everybody should have gotten this in their inbox and emails and posts, but we're going to talk about trends, what we're seeing now in terms of cyber threats. Heath will speak to it relative to claims activity. I know David, you probably chime in on some things he's seeing from a legal standpoint. We're also going to talk about the insurance side of it. We're not going to make this an insurance commercial, so you can all breathe a sigh of relief. I'm not going to do that to you, but I know there's some questions out there for folks that are buying a cyber or E&O policy for tech E&O, and how do you determine how to control the costs, and also how to determine, maybe what types of limits you should be buying for that type of coverage. So we'll touch on that very briefly, talk about areas of vulnerability, areas that we're seeing trends in, and also areas that you need to focus on, not just for yourselves, but for your customers as you're interacting with them and you're plugging into their systems and have access to their systems. And then we're going to get into the legal trends. So David's going to talk quite a bit about what we're seeing in that area. We're going to focus on Biometric Information Privacy Act. And then David's also going to get into some detail around contract language and how this can actually help or hurt you depending on how you structure your contract language, and some things to watch out for, and also some safekeeping ideas. So that's our agenda. And Chris has already given us a quick overview of the folks today that are speaking. As you mentioned, I'm president of Property Casualty Division, but again, my background and most of my career has been spent in the cyber and data privacy space with the insurance background. And so that's primarily where I've spent most of my career. David Croft is at Myers Roman. He also has been tenured significantly as well in this space, not just in cybersecurity, but data privacy and blockchain. And you can see here on this slide quite a resume of the things he's been involved with. So David, thank you for joining us today. Very happy to have you and hear what you have to say with regard to both the legislative side as well as the contract side and the trend side. So, and then we've got Heath Bandy. He is a colleague that works with me at Marsh McLennan, and he's been doing this for 20 plus years as well in the risk consulting area within cyber and data privacy. So with that said, we're going to kick it off and get into the meat of the presentation here. Heath, why don't you kind of start us off and tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of the claims trends that we're seeing with our customers, what the insurance carriers are seeing in terms of claims, and what are maybe some things we need to be looking out for.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. This is kind of our highlight page. We're going to dig a little bit more into this, but some of the things that we're seeing in this cyber risk environment as far as claims are concerned are, focus on technology, especially with everyone having a digital supply chain nowadays, and our evolving use of data, which is essentially, everyone is aggregating their data, storing their data, and utilizing that data for different, uses. And keeping that data has been critical because we are seeing quite a lot of ransomware attacks where this data has been encrypted, stored, and someone wants a ransom to unencrypt that information. I don't think a week goes by right now where I don't get a call from an insured of ours that has a ransomware incident. So, and that's just here in Ohio. It's been very prevalent. The month of July, we had 7 ransomware incidents that were pretty detrimental to those organizations. So we're trying to get ahead of that with cybersecurity controls that we'll talk about later. But, ransomware is obviously the number one cause of, issues with organizations here in Ohio. The second most common claim that I see is the social engineering fraud, where someone, purports to be the CFO or the organization, asks their accounts payable to send money to a fraudulent account, or, someone's, pretending to be a vendor or a customer asking for an insured to send money to what ultimately becomes a fraudulent account. It happens more often than you would imagine. So there's certain controls that we can be putting in place to prevent something like that happening. But those two are top of the line as far as our cybersecurity claims. Quick hit on the market dynamics. We're seeing the rates decrease. We'll talk a little bit more about that here. Underwriters focusing on cybersecurity controls. We'll talk about that later also. And then, the current risk environment, there's a hodgepodge of regulatory, privacy regulations from different federal, state, and local governments that we need to be looking out for, and we'll talk about that too.
Hey, can I chime in with a question?
Sure, go ahead, David.
This can go to either Heath or Jim, and feel free to kick it till later because it might be better in a different slide.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm definitely going to talk about shifting liability contractually. My question for you both is, if a client shifts liability contractually, and by that I mean I'm putting all of the cybersecurity liability on the other side, and as the insured, I therefore contractually have no more liability. I've pushed it off or pushed off a significant part. Does that affect what you pay for cybersecurity insurance? And
So,
to what extent?
Yeah, and I would say, so we get this question all the time. He's smiling because we get this quite often from our customers saying, first of all, do we even need it? Do we even need insurance? And what's our responsibility really? If we're pushing all the liability off through contract, how can we be held responsible? But ultimately what we found is that if it's your customers' information is housed on your system, the courts and the legal system has kind of supported that the responsibility falls back to you, because even though the third party, let's just call it, payment processor, say they get breached and your customer's data is over there, credit card data, they're still going to come back and sue you because you're the one that chose that outside source for that service. And so there is culpability regardless. What you can do is buffer your liability with a contract. But the other part that we also talk about all the time is be aware that contractual commitment, you definitely want to create the buffer and push it down. But that buffer is only as good as the company you're pushing it down to. And so a lot of companies that are in the technology space, for example, that are plugged in, and they're the ones that are the most vulnerable in terms of providing services. Some of those organizations, cannot probably survive a major event. So they won't be around to provide true liability protection in the event there's a big event, right? If you have a smaller tech company and there's, you're tapping into, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and you've got hundreds of millions of health records that you have access to, pretty much the liability of Blue Cross Blue Shield, they're not going to be able to push $100 million of liability back to a tech company that maybe has 25 million in revenue. So we always tell customers, you got to get the insurance, the contract just as a buffer. But Heath, I don't know if you want to add additional commentary to that.
No, yeah, like you said, Jim, we get that question all the time, or where insured say, hey, we're not responsible for that information because it's in the cloud, right? Well, you're still the originator of that information, so you're still responsible, right? So we do see that quite a bit.
Yeah, good question, David. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So for this slide, the cyber risk environment, one of the big issues that we're seeing is from an insurance perspective is trying to understand and quantifying the exposure related to what one vulnerability or what one piece of malware can do to thousands of organizations around the world. Consider like SolarWinds or Log4j or MS Exchange. Whenever they have an incident, there's or a vulnerability, there's thousands of organizations that are affected by that vulnerability, and it's very difficult for the underwriters right now to assess what that total exposure would be to their insurance portfolio if one of those vulnerabilities would affect thousands of their insureds. So big issue there with the catastrophic risk that Jim was talking about. And a lot of the insurance carriers are trying to aggregate that risk and figure out a way to price for it. As far as their insurance book of business, we're seeing a lot of insurance companies carve back limits because for a catastrophic risk, or even excluding it altogether. So it's a big issue in the insurance market right now if there was like some kind of catastrophic loss, right? And then we also have a lot of persistent geopolitical tensions, and that's the war in Ukraine, state-sponsored hackers with China and Russia, a big issue as far as how that would affect the insurance and premiums and rates when you have those organizations or that kind of volatility as far as cyber warfare. From the privacy regulation standpoint, regulations are continuing to evolve. However, this is still a patchwork approach. Federal, state, and local governments are each enacting their own privacy laws and rules. Think about California, for instance. In California, we have the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, and then we also have the California Privacy Rights Act, the CPRA, which is an amendment to the CCPA. But both of those allow for individuals' rights with their consumer statutory damages and require compliance efforts. You have the right to know what your information is being used for, the right to decline your information being used by those organizations. So just in California, we're seeing a lot of changes happening with the privacy regulations. And then in Illinois, we have BIPA, which David will talk a bit more about. BIPA, which is the Biometric Information Privacy Act. We've had some large settlements recently related to that, which is really causing issues in the marketplace. And then, even on a federal level, we had the Video Privacy Protection Act, the VPPA, which was originally enacted to regulate consumer information related to renting video cassettes and, such as like VHS and Betamax. It was a big issue with Blockbuster, right? But however, we're seeing plaintiffs' attorneys are using that law against streaming services nowadays, specifically with Netflix and Hulu. So that's going to have a major impact on the on cybersecurity and the risk environment and the litigation that we're going to see in the future.
Keith, can I add one comment here? I'm really glad that you guys added pixel tracking to this slide. Especially with our how much healthcare we have in this state, or with the clinic and UH and Cardinal and all of those. I was not aware until I'd say probably the past 6 to 8 months about pixel tracking. It's used by, among others, healthcare systems to, and I always thought it was more of a non-personally identifiable piece of data, but the federal government has come out in some of their opinions stating that pixels are in fact PII, and that has led to, and I know this from client experience, that has led to class action lawsuits in California. Because the patients aren't being told that these pixels are being collected. And it's not necessarily a breach, which we typically, that's where the headlines are. Someone got breached and therefore we have to go after that someone. This isn't, this like BIPA, like the BIPA lawsuits, this is interesting and scary because there is no breach, but these attorneys are creating these classes and going after these huge health systems for giant sums of money because they're collecting information. And what I always had thought of as anonymized information using pixels. So I'm glad you put that on there, especially given our where we are in the world nowadays.
Yeah, thanks, David. So pixel tracking, if you're not familiar, it's a code on your website that typically has been used to monitor what are users doing on your website, and then you can use that for targeted advertising. Well, recently we've seen that, tracking tool on a hospital's websites and collecting health information, and then sending that to like a third party, such as like Facebook, right? So that's where the litigation's coming from, David, and I appreciate you giving a little insight on that too. So we are seeing an uptick with that too, as far as plaintiffs' attorneys and the increased litigation. So,
Heath, I'd just say too, add one other comment to that, similar to David's comment, is, the more this stuff evolves, the plaintiff's bar gets more creative in terms of filing activity around and associated with anything in technology, privacy. Pixel's no different. It's very important that we're providing guidance to customers. We do it on the insurance and contract language side to make sure it's in the policies. And if it's not in the policies, you got to tell them, here's a risk that's not covered and why. And you have the responsibility, obviously, as an attorney, to provide real guidance and direction on how do we provide at least some disclosure safeguards and put those in place to, like on BIPA, for example, making sure employees are aware that this is part of the operating procedure and process at this company. And I know you're going to get into that with the White Castle example, but that's what's important, is that we're on top of these issues as they're kind of coming up, and then giving good counsel and consultation to our customers. So, but appreciate that question as well. Thanks, David.
Yeah. So I guess the point is, with the privacy regulations, it's really a hodgepodge of different rules and regulations, that there's no consistent regulation across the board right now. It's very hit or miss with how they approach it. It's a very much a patchwork of regulatory issues that we're seeing, and that is hard to navigate, right? And then again, the ransomware evolution. We've seen a significant uptick in ransomware since 2019. It's been a very big concern industry-wide for the insurance industry, seeing a very high frequency and severity. So a lot of ransomware attacks that are causing a lot of income loss to organizations, and additional expenses that need to be incurred just to get your system back up and running, not even including the payouts for the ransomware. So insurance companies, for that reason, are really focusing on those controls to prevent specifically ransomware attacks. That's what they focus on when they're underwriting right now. It's either social engineering fraud or ransomware. What are you doing to prevent ransomware? I can move on, Jim, if you're ready.
Sorry. So let's talk really briefly about just insurance pricing for anybody that's buying an insurance policy out there in the space. Just a very quick snapshot of the trend, and then if you could just talk a little bit about how to improve your costs in this area if you're someone that's buying a policy now.
Yeah. So as you can see from this chart here, we're seeing decreasing rates, and that's through September. And back in 2020, when everyone started working from home because of the pandemic, we saw a significant increase in claims occurring because employees were remoting into their organization's system that caused that, and there weren't a lot of good controls in place back then. So we were seeing a lot of ransomware attacks, a lot of hacking incidents that were causing, losses to organizations and then insurance companies. So from an insurance perspective, they had to account for that. So at the end of, well, it's probably the beginning of 2021, all through 2022, we saw a significant uptick in rates, and we were essentially in a hard market. Since then, rates are starting to come back down. We've seen a lot more players in the marketplace. There's a lot more competition. The carriers are starting to focus more in on cybersecurity controls and really drilling down on what are your controls and pricing it that way. Where, back in like 2019, you could get a quote with your, website and revenue. That's no longer the case. We're really seeing the underwriters drill down on what security controls that you have in place. So If you have perfect controls, you're actually seeing reductions in your premiums. On the primary, we're seeing reductions of 3.5%. And on the excess, it's even more competitive with different carriers trying to get into the excess layer because they're off of the primary, and they want to get some more premium on their books without the, being in the burn rate, right? So see even more reductions in the premiums, 7.3% in September, which is great for us. And when someone is a first-time buyer, if you are a first-time buyer, this is the time to get in because the rates are really low right now.
Great. Let's talk about key areas of vulnerability that we're seeing, both from the insurance lens and also, David, from your lens, if you're seeing anything in terms of your customers and areas of attack, things that folks need to be considering in terms of safeguarding, putting in good controls. And then maybe, Heath, you could tie this back into just what a risk profiling process is and why that's important.
Yeah, thanks. So here at MMA, we've put together some of the top cybersecurity controls. There's 12 controls here that we have identified that the underwriters are really focusing on when they're taking a look at an insured and how they're going to, give them their premium rate and limits and retentions. This is the 12 controls that they focus on the most. And they usually start the renewal process by doing an external scan of the insured system based on their website. So here at MMA, we start our insurance renewal process. We will go to BitSight or Security Scorecard and pull one of those reports for our insured so that we can kind of get ahead of what the underwriters are going to look at before the underwriters pull their own report. So we can get corrections put in place if something is shown as a vulnerability, or, maybe there might be an issue that pops up on one of those scans. We will take a look at those scans first and work out some of those issues before that gets to the underwriter. And one thing we also do is, if there's some cybersecurity control that you have a no on, like MFA, we try to have a narrative around that. So when we talk about our risk profile, we'll pull together essentially these 12 security controls and develop a narrative around each one where there might be a negative outlook from an underwriter's perspective. So we'll try and put a positive spin on that. No two computer systems are the same, right? So there might be a reason why you don't have fully implemented MFA across the board to satisfy maybe like a traveler's MFA attestation, something like that. So, we just try to create that risk profile before it gets to the underwriter's hands so we can have the best possible outlook before the underwriters even look at your account and price it with premium rates and limits and retentions. So with that said, the number one thing that the underwriters are going to be looking at is obviously MFA. And what they want to see for the multi-factor authentication is if you have any employees remoting in from a home or somewhere else into the computer system, they want to see MFA in place. And that again goes back in 2020 when everyone was working from home and MFA wasn't implemented and we saw all those ransomware attacks. So number one, MFA for remote access. Number two, they want MFA for those admin privileged users who had admin controls over the system. So anytime an admin is logging in, there should be some kind of MFA in place from an underwriter perspective. For the EDR, we really see a lot of the loss mitigated when EDR is in place, and that's because you're seeing who is in the system, where they're going, and what they're accessing. So having an EDR, endpoint detection and response, in place is really helping mitigate that loss, and probably the number two control the underwriters are looking for. I'm seeing this evolve from EDR to MDR, which is the 24-hour monitoring, detection, and response. So if there was an unauthorized user accessing the system, someone gets an alert immediately. about that. And, you know, we are seeing that control start to be asked about and probably required from underwriters' perspective soon in the future. For the backups, you know, underwriters really want to see that they are in a secure location, so they are separate from the network entirely. It's air gapped. They want, you know, those tapes or those backup servers in a secure location where maybe there's an ID badge or key or key lock that needs to be used to actually physically get into, you know, the location where those backups are located. And of course, they want to know, you know, are you testing your backups? How quickly can you utilize those backups to get back up and running? That goes a long way with the underwriters, because, you know, if you have a business income loss, the faster you can get up running again, the less loss that you would have from a business income standpoint. And, you know, underwriters are really drilling in on that. And then the email filtering and web security, we're seeing a lot of underwriters really focus in on the email filtering. Just want to see that there's some kind of filtering product in place. And, you know, if something comes from an outside source, they want to see that banner on that email, you know, notifying your employees like, hey, this email came from outside, and be careful what you click on if there's any links attached in this email. And that goes to the cybersecurity awareness training and phishing testing down here on the bottom left. So again, you know, like a lot of vendors like KnowBe4 are doing phishing testing, and you know, if someone fails that phishing testing, that they're required to do additional training. That goes a really long way with preventing a ransomware attack, because no matter how many controls you have in place, it always comes down to that employee clicking on a link that maybe they should not have clicked on. And we're seeing a lot of, you know, testing being done where, you know, maybe 35% of the employees initially are clicking on links and actually inputting the, you know, information that they shouldn't be inputting in those tests. And then after those tests have been going on for a couple of years, you know, those click rates go down to, you know, 3-5%, which is great. The closer we can get that to zero is better.
Yeah, and I'll just say, Keith, if I could chime in too. So we've talked a lot about trends, and we talked about, you know, social engineering and some of those other things and terminology and ransomware. But this all kind of majority of the breach activity that we're seeing is still coming through BEC. So your business email compromise is the primary source in most cases for gaining access into the system to begin with. And so in the blue down here, kind of more, I call kind of soft safeguards and operational safeguards that you can do in terms of your operations team to kind of implement good policies and protocols and procedures. It's also where David and his team get involved in terms of helping to craft, you know, incident response planning. If you don't have an IRP, you know, it's just good practices and safeguards. And, you know, one of the things I will also say that's important for both the members on the call today, as well as maybe your customers, is going through a process where you go through an mock incident scenario. And so, Heath, I don't know, can you give one soundbite on that? And then I want to flip this over to Dave and have him jump into kind of the legal and regulatory trends. But can you give one soundbite on that for me?
Yeah, so for the incident response planning and testing, you know, when you have an incident and it's a real world incident, there's a lot of emotion that goes involved that comes with that. And people probably don't think that it's an emotional thing, but you know, when you have a private company and you come into the office and all your screens are blank and someone's asking you for money to unencrypt your system, it is actually a very emotional, you know, incident, right? So what we always talk about is, you know, have a plan and make sure, you know, that plan includes, you know, what numbers to call if that does happen, who internally should be involved inside your organization, who externally should be involved, you know, what vendors are you using, you know, what legal counsel are you using, and, you know, have a step-by-step process for that. And it takes a lot of the emotion out of it, right? And it makes it, you have more informed decisions when you do that. And when you practice that, and that actually occurs, it really helps mitigate the loss, because you know the steps that you need to go through to get this resolved. And it's a less of an emotional incident then. I will tell you, and surprisingly, I need to tell you this, is make sure that incident response plan is not on your system. All right. Because you don't want the hacker to, know what your plan is and know the steps you're going to take to resolve your issue, because, that kind of defeats the whole purpose of the plan. So make sure that plan's not on your system. Two, anyone who's involved in that plan should have a printed copy of the plan at their desk, at home, or wherever they are with their, however wherever they would be when that incident would occur. They should have that plan with them so that they can follow along and everyone's on the same page, with the phone numbers included in the plan, so everyone knows who to call. And also, if your phones are part of the computer system, make sure you have phone numbers outside of the company's phone system. So mobile phones or home phones, whatever it takes, personal emails, so that you can still operate and communicate outside of your system being completely blank. Because a lot of times we've had incidents where that incident response plan was on the system and no one had access to it, because now the system has shut down. So just things to think about when you have a breach response plan put in place.
Great. Thank you, Heath.
Yep.
Appreciate that. David, thank you for your patience. And we're excited to hear about some of the trends going on the legal side within the cyber and data privacy space. And so I will flip it over to you.
Thanks, Jim. I am going to talk about BIPA, the Biometric Information Privacy Act. We don't really hear a lot about that in these cybersecurity presentations. It's a very specific act, a very specific acronym. So I'm going to talk about that. But the trends have been going towards providing rights to individuals with their data. We saw that with the GDPR. California followed suit, and there are a lot of other states that are falling in line. And essentially, the trend is we're going to provide rights to individuals in their data, because for the longest time, individuals' data was just collected by companies and used however they wanted. And data, as a lot of us already know, is the new oil. It's the most valuable thing out there. Data is valuable. Ask OpenAI, ask Elon Musk, ask anyone else that's using it to build their companies into multi-billion-dollar entities. Data is valuable. So why do we care about BIPA? It's an Illinois law. It was actually enacted in 2008. BIPA regulates the collection, retention, disclosure, and destruction of biometric data. What is that? So we're talking about physiological characteristics like DNA, fingerprints, which is used a lot, face, which is used a lot, hand, retina, or ear features, and believe it or not, odor. I don't know of any technology that's tracking that now, but that's in there. Behavioral characteristics are like gestures, voice, typing, rhythm, gait. But primarily, you're going to see this mostly with fingerprints and facial recognition. Where is this used? Why do we care about this? Well, there's used in a lot of different areas. Most of us use it to unlock our phones, but from a business standpoint, it's used a lot in tracking of employees. So biometric time clocks, use your fingerprint, use your face to log in. That's one of the big ones. And security access. I just mentioned logging into our phones with our face. There are other ways it's used, but those are the two big ones. And so what does BIPA say when it talks about biometric information, now that we know what it's talking about? So one of the big things is it requires informed consent from the individual prior to collection. It permits a limited right to disclosure. It mandates protection obligations and retention guidelines. So if you're the one that's collecting this stuff, you've got specific guidelines you have to follow to protect it. Prohibits profiting from biometric data. Here's the big one, we're going to talk about that with White Castle. Creates a private right of action for individuals harmed by BIPA violations. So that's got statutory damages of up to $1,000 for each negligent violation and up to $5,000 for each intentional or reckless violation. So what, right? Let's go back to White Castle here, okay? So White Castle, the case was about this woman who was using the employees were using their fingerprint scan to log in, to access their pay stubs and their computers. And each fingerprint scan was then transmitted to a third-party vendor for verification. And so the plaintiff in that case basically said White Castle did not seek her consent to acquire and disclose her data for nearly a decade after BIPA was enacted. Okay, no big deal. White Castle's a big company, $1,000, right? Well, the big thing about White Castle was it wasn't just the one time. It was each and every single time. It was actually, it went to the Illinois Supreme Court and it was a contentious decision. It was a split opinion, 4-3, but they found in favor of the plaintiff. And it was a big number, 40 some odd million dollars in favor of the plaintiff. And one thing I should mention and take a step back, there was a previous case in 2019, Rosenbach versus Six Flags in Illinois, that held that actual harm is not a requirement to establish standing to sue under BIPA. So there was no breach. I think we talked about this earlier. No breach, like in the Pixels situation, no breach, just a violation of law. But there's a statutory damage, statutory damages, $1,000 each time. Well, that's what White Castle held, $1,000 each time. So every time these employees were checking in using their fingerprints and it was being transmitted to a third-party vendor, that was adding up quite a bit, and they were violating. So why do we care about White Castle? It's in Illinois. We're in Ohio. So what? Who cares? Well, as GDPR should have taught all of us, as the CCPA should have taught all of us, we need to worry about this for two reasons. Number one, we may not be in Illinois right now, but we might do business with a company or individuals in Illinois. And to the extent that that triggers BIPA, you can be held liable for damages in Illinois. So that's number one. Number two, it's coming to a state near you, right? So California and Colorado already have things on the books. Several other states like Arizona, Hawaii, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New York, that's coming. We saw that with GDPR. It went to California, now it's spreading like wildfire across the states. And each state typically has their own take on it. But at the end of the day, what is happening is the government is providing individuals with rights in their data, and that includes biometric data. You may not be using biometric data in the traditional sense, such as using a fingerprint to check into your business, but think about facial recognition and other types of products that are being used out there that help your business to gain traction, to gain customers, et cetera, and so forth. And then apply that to what you're doing and the potential regulations that are coming. Jim, you've got up here some other considerations. I know this isn't BIPA, but one of the things that I do want to mention quickly is that the SEC passed some rules back in July, and essentially they're coming. The deadline is this month. They're starting to enforce these rules, and that is mainly two big things for publicly traded companies or companies that are registered with the SEC. And that's number one, if you've had a cybersecurity incident that is what material, I guess they call it material, And so there's a determination mechanism there to figure out what is material and what is not. But if you've had a material cybersecurity incident, you have to disclose that. That's reported in a form 8-K. And then also disclosures are required to essentially talk about what cybersecurity protections you have in place. How are you going to avoid these cybersecurity incidents? And that's Form 10-K. So those are things that public companies are going to have to do. And if I'm not a gambling man, but if I'm going to bet on this, I'm going to bet that there's some sort of corollary with this and what may be required of private companies down the road somehow. Might be a function of licensure or something else. And also public companies, they may be passing this requirement down to their private service providers, vendors, etc. I've seen it.
So David, quick question for you on that. Is the SEC, are they requiring any materiality qualifier, or is it, because that was, I think, in the past that, unless a company felt it was a material breach event that they didn't have to disclose. I don't know if that's still the case, or now they're taking that away and saying, no, you've got to be more in full disclosure on your prevention strategy, et cetera.
So it's a very subjective test, Jim. It's what the registrant deems material, and it's more of a facts and circumstances type thing. So it's almost as if the SEC is saying you have to report everything, because if you didn't report something that you didn't think was material, the SEC could come in and look at that via a shareholder complaint and say, wait a minute, you didn't report this, but we think it was material, right? It's a subjective test. And then you're in a fight with the SEC to determine whether or not it was or wasn't material. I think what is material to a company like Facebook might be, or what is material to a company, a very small public company, might be less material to Facebook. It's the facts and circumstances.
Sure, makes sense. Thank you. All right, David, you want to go into contract? We've got a few minutes. We're getting close to the hour time frame. Going into
I will be very quick. We represent clients in the EU and the UK, and obviously we represent clients here, right? There is a stark contrast between EU, UK clients and US clients as it relates to data privacy and cybersecurity, okay? And I'm not just talking about the clients that actually take precautions. I would say that there is more of a familiarity amongst the EU and UK clients as opposed to the US clients as it relates to shifting of liability and indemnification. I have found that most UK and EU clients take the position that if we've done something wrong, if we've caused a breach, or if we've done something or we failed to do something that caused a breach and it hurt you, then we should cover you, and vice versa. What I've found in the US is that everyone is so worried about cybersecurity and data privacy now. 10 years ago, I wasn't really even having this conversation, although I was trying to. The US clients, for the most part, are saying, you have to cover us for all breaches, and I don't care who caused it. I'm shifting all the liability over to you, even the stuff that I do. I don't necessarily think that's fair, and it's a very difficult way to negotiate a contract, but I bring that up because if you are the party that's having that thrown onto you, you have to be careful. Even though it sounds crazy, it is likely going to be enforceable. So Jim, you're talking about events that cause companies to shut the door. That's one. Even if you're not liable, you as a company need to be aware of these contracts and make sure you have an attorney helping you negotiate these things, because shifting of liability is really important, and it's very it can be drastically done against you. Indemnification. Are you covering me? Am I covering you? I just mentioned that. You need to know contractually what data is being collected. Where is it being stored? Is it stored in a server in China? I hope not, because then it's owned by the Chinese government. So you need to know where that stuff is being stored. What if it's stored in California? Does the CCPA affect that? I don't know. You should know that contractually. Liability caps and exceptions, okay? We're talking again about door shutting events, right? If you can cap your liability at X and you're able to cover that with insurance, which, by the way, if you don't have cybersecurity insurance, I've had 2 clients in the past 5 years that were breached that didn't, and they are no longer in business. So absolutely call Jim, call Heath, go out and get cybersecurity insurance immediately if you don't have it. But these caps can also help. Choice of law and venue, again, we don't want California, even though we might be subject to it. We don't want New York. We don't want any of the coasts because they tend to have very different laws compared to the rest of the country. Stick to Ohio if you can. Ohio has an affirmative defense here for companies that are protecting themselves with cybersecurity protocols. And I think that's I know I rushed through that. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer it, but I wanted to get through all of those.
That was really good, David. I have a question on the federal side. So I know I've seen for 20, well, maybe 15 out of the 20 years I've been doing this, we've been talking about coming up. Is there anything on the horizon on the federal side to come up with a standard regulation, or is this always just going to be state driven in terms of the laws around privacy?
I think you've got too many states in play, too many agencies in play. IRS, SEC, all of these agencies are going to be putting their own spin on it. FinCEN has the Corporate Transparency Act now. All of these, there's too many agencies. That's number one. Too many agencies, too many states throwing their hat in the ring. Number two is I don't see that anyone will be on the same page to get a bill passed through Congress. Also because every bill that goes through has to have 13 things tacked on it that have nothing to do with what the bill was about in the first place. So I don't see it, Jim.
Thanks, David. Appreciate that. We are about 5 minutes or a little beyond 5 minutes left in our presentation. Wanted to open it up. Maybe a question or two. There's maybe one in the chat here. I'm going to switch it over to Chris to let us know what we got there. And if we need to answer any questions, we're happy to do that. We got a few minutes left.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, and thanks to David and Heath for fantastic conversation. As Jim mentioned, we'll take some from the chat. I've gotten a few kind of sent to me, but as we just have a few minutes left, if anyone wants to drop them in, please feel free. And of course, I'm sure all of our speakers would be happy to chat offline about any of this. But the first one up of active threat environment question, from a technical perspective, what key areas should organizations focus on to actively control and mitigate cyber risks? So I don't know who might want to take that, but for the three of you, if anyone wants to hop in for our first question up.
I'll take that if you don't mind, Jim.
Please.
So, this is a really good question because, even with cyber liability underwriters, really focusing heavily on MFA, EDR, and PAM tools, we actually had our MMA claims analytics team. They recently released a report. It was titled "Using Data to Prioritize Cybersecurity Investments," right? And surprisingly, they found, the biggest driver of reducing a total financial loss from a cyber incident was management of hardening techniques, specifically managing the organization's Active Directory group. So just by configuring security settings for users and computers prevented many incidents from being much worse from a financial impact to the organization. And what that is essentially is, if you have employees leaving the organization, make sure that those user IDs are inactivated, because sometimes we have bad actors, still logging into the system, after they've been terminated and causing issues. And the other thing is, limiting, what your employees can access through the system itself. So, for Jim and I, here at MMA, we only have access to a few folders in the system, right? We're not able to have administrative access or anything like that. We're very limited on what we can, touch inside the computer system. So if, one of our user IDs was, taken over by a hacker, there's very little that bad actor can do with my login and password. So just managing that was a big driver and mitigating loss, right? However, underwriters are still really drilling down on MFA, EDR, and the PAM tools.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well,
And I don't know if that, sorry, Chris, let me cut you off. I didn't know if the question was coming more from the hard tech side or if it was more operational, but I think it's a combination of multiple things that you have to be doing. And so those are the trends and those are the areas of, I guess, vulnerability that are being focused on the most. So we're trying to get customers to focus on that. Heath and I are not, by the way, and I would say, maybe I don't want to speak for David, but we're not technology or IT security people. We're not folks that have a background in that. You folks have more technology knowledge than we do. So we wouldn't be here to be able to consult you on techniques, but we can give you the high level of the areas of focus and vulnerability that people are taking advantage of as the bad actors out there that are getting in these systems. So hopefully it gives a little color around it. And if you want anything else, you can certainly hit us up direct and we can get you more detail or have a conversation specifically around that question.
great. Thank you, Jim. And I think we have probably time for one more, which actually there's probably first part for maybe on the insurance side, the second part maybe kind of on the legal risk side. But thank you, Warner, for pushing this one in. But what insurance solutions that are cost effective do you have for companies such as SAS, which is probably a good amount of this audience and certainly our community, that have high volumes of data? As a past health tech company, they decided the cost of insurance outweighed the benefit of risk transfer due to the high cost. So maybe Jim and Heath, if you want to take that, and then maybe David kind of wrap us up.
You want Heath? You want me?
However, if you want to answer it, Jim, that's fine with me. But we understand that historically cyber liability insurance was in a hard market and pricing was not very good, and we're certainly in a softer market now where there's a lot more competition and those cyber liability policy premiums are coming down significantly. We showed you that chart earlier, but we're also being more creative on how we're insuring our organizations, right? So a lot of these policies can be modular. So if there's you didn't want the business income piece of the policy, or you didn't want the e-crime piece of the policy, you just wanted to focus on maybe the breach response and the ransomware, there are different solutions as far as that's concerned to kind of tailor the policy to each organization. It doesn't have to be a full suite of coverage for each insurer, because like we talked about earlier, every computer system's different, every individual organization is different, and how we tailor those policies is different for each of those.
Yeah, and I would just close on that comment too. You're talking about two relatively difficult data privacy risk areas. One is technology, one's healthcare. So those are really tough because of record count risk and access to record count. So that the market does from an industry perspective, those are some of the tougher industries. But as Heath's already alluded to, the market's come down. So I would encourage you to find, and this is not a spin for us, but a broker that has a lot of market leverage and a lot of market relationships in the cyberspace specifically. They will find you a solution. We don't have a situation where we can't find a solution right now. And that's on some of the toughest risks that we have out there in terms of connectivity to either healthcare records or PII or credit card data. So think of the companies that are the biggest and have most risk to that. We actually are insuring those. So there is an opportunity to get insurance, but you're correct. It really does come down to in a hard market, you may have to decide to self-insure because the pricing's too high. And I think that was the question. But now's the time to probably get back in and take another look. So, David?
Yeah. And Jim, just to add to that, even if you don't have the perfect controls in place with MFA, EDR, and PAM tools, we're still seeing, insurance companies want to write some of those risks too. So it's definitely a soft market right now.
David, you want to wrap us up?
Sure. I guess the only small point that I will add to this is risk transfer is important. But as Jim said, you really want to belt and suspenders yourself in this spot, and risk transfer is not going to help you a lot in scenarios where you're being hit with government fines, or if the risk if the party you're transferring the risk to goes out of business or doesn't have enough assets to cover the risk. That's all I have to say about that.
Okay.
Great point. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and Heath and Jim. Thank you as well. And again, Tim Porter, who wasn't able to join today, but helped us put this together. We are at time, and I know we had other questions coming in. So I'd very much welcome anyone in the chat or who didn't get an opportunity to ask a question to please connect with our friends and partners, Jim and Heath and David. They've been fantastic to work with us. And so very much recommend that. And then Cheryl, we saw in the comments, you asked how you could get a copy of this recording. So we'll record this as soon as it's downloaded to the OhioX YouTube channel. And that's where we post all of our virtual events like this. So we hope that it's a resource after today and beyond. But again, just wanted to thank all of our presenters for taking the time to put this together. A lot of prep on the front end, which we are very much appreciative of, and everyone for attending and being engaged and asking questions. So hopefully we can have some more of these on this topic, because there's a lot of questions we didn't get to in the future. But again, please feel free to chat one-on-one. And if not, we will see you all soon. So thanks for joining, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye, everyone.